Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you today. And I'm actually coming from you from my home in Columbia, Missouri. So under normal circumstances, we would be coming from you from our state office or perhaps even in person, but obviously times are a little different right now. So that being said, it's a great opportunity for me to speak with you today. And our topic is going to be the CFAP program, which stands for Coronavirus Food Assistance Program. So I'll refer to CFAP throughout. If you're familiar with USDA or FSA, you know we love our acronyms. So if I start talking too much alphabet soup, feel free to stop me and I can clarify as we go along. So we'll go ahead and get started. I do have a few slides I wanted to run through with you all just to provide some basics of the program. And then at the end, I thought if we have time, I can kind of go through some of the resources that are online and some of the forms that are part of the application process. And then of course, we'll have time for questions. So, but yeah, again, it's great to be with you. And as Carisha said, I'm with Missouri State FSA office. So I work out of Columbia, and I serve producers and customers across the state. So hopefully, if I haven't met you in person, one of these days we'll get to meet formally. So with that, we'll go ahead and get rolling here. So just a quick overview of the program. So CFAP is providing financial assistance to those producers of ag commodities who suffered a 5% or greater price decline or had losses due to market and supply chain disruptions from the COVID pandemic. And again, those who face additional significant marketing costs as a result of the lower demand, the surplus in production, and the disruptions to the shipping chain, if you will. So we're trying to, kind of encompass several factors here, but the way the program is designed, again, it's specifically looking at those who suffered, losses due to the pandemic from COVID. As far as the application period, so sign up for CFAP began last Tuesday, May 26th, and the Farm Service Agency is the agency responsible for administering the program. So FSA is accepting the applications and related eligibility paperwork for CFAP. If you're not familiar with FSA, we service counties across the state and the nation. So we're one of few public-facing agencies under the USDA umbrella. So, our presence in communities across the state, that makes us a good option to obviously administer programs like this. So in our current operating status, I'll just mention this real quick, we are still operating under restricted access provisions, if you will. So most of our service centers we still have restricted physical access to the public, but we are open for business by phone, by email, fax, and in a lot of our cases in Missouri, I know we've kind of gotten creative with getting our service center set up to accept paperwork through a window, or some offices have set up a drop box outside the front door. So, again, it's challenging times, but we're making the best of it and just here to serve. So that being said, again, applications, the period is open and producers can sign up through August 28th. So we're just really in the second week here of sign up, but there is still time. So I know there's been quite a rush here at the beginning, but the sign up does go through the end of August. So as far as payments, there's actually two funding sources associated with CFAP. So a total of $16 billion was part of this, the overall funding. So $9.5 billion is appropriated funding that was provided as part of the CARES Act that was, obviously due to the coronavirus. So the other portion of that $16 billion is actually funding from Commodity Credit Corporation. So there's kind of two buckets of money that we're utilizing for payments for CFAP. that is important in that, you know, depending on what you're applying for with your commodities, it'll basically be pooled into the different buckets. But, you know, I guess from a producer standpoint, you won't really see that much effect on, you know, your end total, if you will. So, and we'll kind of get to that here in a little bit as we look at some different examples. So, as far as the availability of this funding, when producers sign up, you know, they submit their application and they receive payment, they're actually receiving 80% of the maximum total payment once their application is approved. So when they apply, you know, they're going to apply for all of the, you know, their inventory, their eligible commodities that they have, and then we're going to just take that total and we're going to pay 80% of that at this time. So the remaining portion, the remaining 20%, will be paid at a later date as the funds remain available. So, you know, we're going ahead and paying that 80% up front, and then the 20% will be allocated, you know, pending funding availability. So that all is, of course, subject to payment limitation, and again, we'll get into that here in a minute, but that's kind of how the payments are structured. So as we go through the discussion today, I'll refer to farmers.gov/CFAP, and that is a really useful website for this particular program. And again, hopefully we'll have time to look at that here towards the end, and we can kind of walk through some of the features. But there is payment rates listed for all eligible commodities on that web page. So I don't have all of those included in the presentation, but those are all now available on that web page. So, and again, we'll try to get to that here in a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about payment eligibility. So payment limitation for this particular program, we're looking at $250,000 per person for all commodities combined. So going back, as far as the application, producers will apply, you know, one application per person. So we're not applying by farm or by commodity. We're going to have one application per producer or entity, and the application is subject to that $250,000 payment limitation. There are special rules that apply for participants that are corporations, LLCs, limited partnerships. So any kind of a corporate entity will have some additional provisions. And in those cases, those entities can receive up to $750,000 based on the number of shareholders. So we're looking at, still looking at the $250 per shareholder. We cannot exceed 3. So then the maximum per entity would be the $750,000. The little caveat to that provision is the shareholders, in order to be eligible, they must contribute at least 400 hours of active personal labor or active personal management to the operation. So, you know, as long as they're meeting that criteria, then they kind of go into that that eligibility phase, and then, you know, the entity could potentially receive up to the $750,000. We also have a adjusted gross income certification that is part of the eligibility for the program. So individual producers will need to certify that they meet the AGI limitation of $900,000 or less, unless they, at least 75% or more of their income comes from farming. So farming, ranching, or forestry related activities. So if you're a case where you exceed that 900,000, but 75% of your income does come from farming or one of the related activities, then we have a special form, of course, that we'll ask you to complete to certify to that provision for your eligibility requirement. So there is a form for the AGI certification, and I'll show you that here in a little bit. So again, that's part of the the application process, and producers must also be in compliance with highly erodible land and wetland conservation. So what that means is for producers that are, they're producing an agricultural commodity, they're actually out tilling up ground. We have a highly erodible land and wetland compliance process that we go through. So chances are, if you've already done business with us, if you're already enrolled in programs, this will already be on file. For, let's say, if we have a livestock producer that has not done business with us, and they're not, tilling up land, if they're not participating in other programs, this form does still apply, but we have some just some special provisions for those folks. So, and again, I'll get to that here in a little bit. So that kind of runs through a quick overview, and then the payment eligibility side of the program. So now we're going to get into the actual eligible commodities and kind of what that looks like, the payment structure, and just some different details there. So I'm going to start with non-specialty crops and wool. So several commodities are eligible under this category, and I've listed it here on the screen. Corn, soybeans, oats, those are pretty common in Missouri. We actually have upland cotton is included, and then hard red spring wheat is included. The other varieties of wheat at this point have not been added as eligible commodities. So, but we are looking at several, and again, this is just under the non-specialty crop category. And these are all listed on the farmers.gov/CFAP webpage. For this program, wool is also an eligible commodity, and I know we do have some production of that here in Missouri. And just a note about grazing crops. So any crops intended for grazing purposes are not considered eligible for CFAP. So as far as payment structure for our non-specialty crops and wool, producers will be paid based on their inventory that's subject to price risk that they had as of January 15th. So we're looking at basically the inventory that was on hand that the producer had risk in as of that January 15th date. So a single payment will be made based on 50% of that 2019 total production or the 2019 inventory, whichever is smaller. So we're going to take that number, we're going to multiply it by 50%, and then we're going to take that and multiply by the payment rate. So I know that gets a little confusing. One of the best resources we have is a spreadsheet that will actually do all this for you. So we'll get to that too. But basically, we're just looking at the inventory on hand as of January 15th. And I have included payment rates here for the non-specialty crops. I was able to get all of those on the slide here. So again, this is provided on the website. So you'll find the different commodity listed there on the far left, and then the coordinating unit of measure that that's what we use to actually calculate the payment. So most of these are going to be in bushels, with the exception of canola and cotton. Those are going to be in pounds. So then as far as the two payment rates, the CARES Act payment rate, that's going to be applied against 50% of your inventory as of January 15th, and then not to exceed that total production from last year. And then the CCC payment rate, again, that's just the other part of the bucket of money. So we're going to apply both of those for your total payment per commodity. And again, the calculator will kind of show that a little better, how that's all figured. So next we'll move on to dairy. Specifically on dairy, for this program, we're looking at dairy operations that had milk production in January, February, and March of 2020. So you can have either or all 3 of those months. If you had milk production, then that's going to be eligible. If you had any milk that was dumped during those months, I know we heard of, at least with our agency, we heard of some cases in Missouri where the milk was being dumped. That also is eligible for assistance through CFAP. So for dairy, we're talking about the milk production, not specifically about the animal itself, if that makes sense. So as far as the payments for dairy, a single payment will be made based on the producer's certification of their production for the first quarter, which is January, February, March. We're going to take that production and multiply it by $4.71 per hundredweight. So that's going to be the first part of the payment, and then the second part is going to just be based on a national adjustment to each producer's production multiplied by $1.47 per hundredweight. So for dairy, we're just asking for the total 2019 production that suffered the 5% or greater price decline and any production that was not sold. And again, on the dairy, when we kind of look at the payment calculator, you can see it's a pretty cut and dry process for certifying your production there. So we'll look at that here in a little bit. As far as specialty crops, we're actually looking at kind of 3 different scenarios here for the specialty crop category. So producers of these crops are eligible for one of the 3 categories. So if producers had crops that had a 5% or greater reduction in sales price between mid-January and mid-April, those are going to be eligible. If they had produce shipped but subsequently was spoiled because there was no market, that will also be considered eligible. And then if they had shipments that did not actually leave the farm, or if they had crops that were still in the field that remain unharvested, we can also count that production. So kind of 3 different parts of the specialty crop. I haven't listed all of those because there are several. Again, those are all going to be listed on farmers.gov/CFAP. So, and hopefully we'll be able to look at that here in a little bit. But if producers, if they actually ended up donating crops that would have otherwise spoiled due to market disruptions, we can also look at that as far as, those will be considered losses similar to crops that were not sold or not shipped. So again, that was kind of another component of, what producers were looking at having to do as a result of the pandemic. Payments will be available for specialty crops for which a producer has production not subject to an agreed upon price. So here we're talking about, any production they have that will not fall under like a forward contract or, some kind of forward agreement where they've actually locked in, a contract on that commodity. And that's going to be the same for our non-specialty crops as well. So the corn, soybeans, basically producer still has to have a risk in the crop to be eligible during the specified time frame. Okay, so a little bit about the payment structure again for our specialty crops. So again, we're talking about the 5% or greater price decline. The time frame for this category, we're looking at January 15th through April 15th. So for dairy, we were talking about, January, February, March. For this specific category, we're looking at January 15th through April 15th. And we're just talking about any kind of record such as bill of sale or documenting the price that a producer received for the crop. Documentation like that can be used to certify your, what you had on hand and your actual production. So payments for shipments that left the farm but spoiled because there was no market, we're looking for documentation such as a letter from the buyer, with an explanation that, hey, here's what happened due to non-payment. So this will apply to producers who have met contractual obligations in delivering the crop, but have not yet been paid, again, due to the market disruption. And then lastly, payments for crop shipments that did not leave the farm. So, crops that were still in the field or, if they were harvested, but still, let's say, just being stored locally because there was no market, no buyers. That's what we're talking about here. So, those crops that have not been and will not be sold. So again, a full list of the payment rates and eligible crop commodities, that's available on the farmers.gov webpage, and we'll look at that here in just a little bit. Okay, and then the last category I want to run through quickly is livestock. And I have listed all of the eligible livestock categories here. So again, for hogs, we're looking at pigs under 120 pounds or hogs over that 120 pound mark. Cattle we have divided up into feeder cattle, slaughter cattle, and then all other. So for feeder cattle, we're looking at anything under the 600 pound mark or over 600 pound. So that's split into two weight ranges. And then slaughter cattle, we're looking at fed cattle and mature cattle. All other cattle, that's going to be basically any other cattle that you had on hand or you sold that is not intended for dairy production. We'll get to look at this too. There's a really helpful chart on the website that kind of correlates some of our common references to the different categories or ages of cattle and how that fits into these specific 5 categories. So I think there was some confusion when sign up first started, as far as where does my inventory fit into these categories. So we've got some pretty good guidance to kind of help work through that. So we'll look at that here in a minute. And then sheep are also eligible. We're looking at anything less than 2 years of age. So any lambs and yearlings. So again, there's a nice crosswalk we have, between the commonly used terminology and the different livestock categories. And that's, again, on the farmers.gov/CFAP webpage. Just to note that livestock that are no longer used for dairy production and have entered the beef cattle market may be eligible for CFAP as long as all other eligibility requirements have been met. So, if they were in dairy production and now they're being used for beef, then we can look at those as an eligible livestock for this particular category. So the payment structure for livestock, we're looking at a single payment using the sum of the producer's number of livestock sold. We're looking at dates of January 15th through April 15th, and then we're going to multiply that number of livestock by the payment rates, and that's per head. So that's one component, and then we're looking at the highest inventory number that a producer had on hand between April 16th and May 14th. So 2 components of the payment structure on livestock. First will be anything sold January 15th through April 15th, and then the second will be the highest number of inventory between April 16th and May 14th. And again, I have included the payment rates for livestock on this slide. So I won't read through all of this, you all can see this, but we've just got it split up by the cattle and the 5 different categories, and then hogs, and then the lambs and yearlings. So the first payment rate is going to be the rate for anything that you had sold January 15th through April 15th. The second category is going to show payment rates for your highest inventory between April 16th and May 14th. So even if you didn't sell anything, but you still have, 100 head of, let's say, hogs on hand, you're going to be looking at that $17 payment rate for that number of head. And vice versa. If you ended up selling everything, between that January and April dates, so you don't have anything on hand for April through May, you're still going to get paid for what you actually sold earlier in the year. So, okay, and just quickly on certification, so we're looking at total sales of eligible livestock, again, between the January 15th and April 15th, and then your inventory that you would have had on hand as of January 15th, including any offspring. And then the second piece is the highest inventory of eligible livestock between April 16th and May 14th. So, okay, so additional commodities, we've covered all of the commodities that are eligible. Let's talk a little bit about commodities that are not currently covered and what we can look at for those. So right now we have basically an open period for notice of funding availability. And this is producers' chance to basically submit information on commodities that are not currently eligible. They can collect information and submit this through the regulations.gov website for consideration. So we've heard from, a few goat producers. There's certain specialty crops that are not eligible at this time, but that doesn't mean that we're not open for consideration on those. So this website, this regulations.gov, has a lot more information, and there is information listed on farmers.gov as well that we can look at for this piece. So again, the comment period is open. Producers may submit comments through June 22nd. They can go to the website or they can do it by mail. Again, all of this information is on the farmers.gov webpage. So let's just quickly talk through how to apply. As I mentioned before, we're operating a little differently under the current restrictions due to the COVID, but we are still open for business and accepting applications and working by phone appointment. So this chart just kind of gives kind of a quick look at, the different steps you can take to apply. So you can actually access the application online or request it by mail through your local service center. Once you have done that piece, then we are encouraging you to go ahead and schedule an appointment with your local office. This is not required though. I mean, if you work through the Excel calculator online, that will automatically generate your application. You can sign that application and mail it into the office. If you have questions about filling out the application or maybe eligibility, certainly we're encouraging you to work with your local office by phone and email, but that's not required. You can certainly just complete the application, print it off and mail it to us. If you do schedule an appointment, then you can begin filling out the application. We do have a call center at the national level that can also help, and I'll provide information on that here in a minute. So once you have the application, you can submit that to your local office. So then we can begin processing, working through that. Once we have the application, we review it, approve it or reject it, and then we're going to pay, if it's approved, based on we're going to pay 80% of the eligible total. So again, if you need additional assistance, attend your scheduled appointment so we can work through the application with you and make sure we have all the eligibility paperwork necessary. So one point I do want to make is, I think I mentioned it earlier, but most of the eligibility paperwork should already be on file if you are already conducting business with us. The eligibility forms, those will come into play for our new producers, for those who have not been in our office before, or if you've done business with us in the past but maybe not recently, we'll probably need to look at getting the eligibility forms updated. But if you're already, enrolled in programs and you're visiting us regularly, then chances are the eligibility paperwork should be good to go. So this just lists the eligibility forms required along with the application, and I do want to just look at these forms briefly here in a minute. So I've just listed them here, but we'll look at those more in depth. And then I've talked about the payment calculator, and we'll also look at that as another resource. So this is just a checklist for our customers that are new to FSA, and I kind of already went through this, but we're encouraging folks to definitely contact their local office or the national call center. That's a great way to get started. Also visiting the website, lots of resources there. So And again, I've already mentioned it, but producers can apply by mail, fax, drop off, any other electronic means, since we're not physically open to the public. Just a quick note on this, new producers don't need a farm number, and we're not requiring any kind of acreage report. So just some basic information about, name, address, tax ID, your farm operation, your AGI compliance, and then direct deposit information. That's pretty well covers the basics of what we need. And just to kind of wrap up the PowerPoint here, just a few items wanted to mention again. Documentation to support an application. It may be requested. Our programs are administered through local county committees, if you're not familiar with that, which are comprised of local producers in each county. And they do have the, it's at their discretion as they're reviewing and approving applications. They do have the discretion to ask for documentation. That being said, this program is a certification. Producer comes in the office, they've got, their numbers written down. We're not going to be asking up front. In most cases, we're not going to just, require verifiable records. Certification is kind of the name of the game. And I just mentioned, but we do not require an acreage report at the time of application. And if you've not done business with us and you don't have a farm number, that's not a requirement either. So we've really tried to streamline the process. So we're going to go to the farmers.gov/CFAP website here in a minute. And then we're also going to look at the online tool to run the payment calculator. And I mentioned the call center. We do have a national call center set up. It's a great resource, even if you're used to doing business locally. If you've called and we're not getting to your call, the same day. Hopefully we are, but it is a busy time. So feel free to utilize the national call center. I've got the phone number here, and it's also on the website. But this is a great resource. And then I've just listed our Missouri FSA website, which has more information on CFAP and, of course, all of our other programs. We post our newsletters, monthly newsletters here. Any of our state level news releases are posted here. We have contact information, so that's also a helpful website, fsa.usda.gov/mo. And I do have my contact information here. So feel free to reach out to me. Again, I'm at the state office, but I, kind of a direct line to the counties as well. So I'm available by phone and by email. Please feel free to reach out to me. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump over to the website. We're going to look at a few resources there, and then we should still have time for a few questions. So. Okay, so hopefully you all can see this screen. I'm now on the farmers.gov/CFAP webpage. And I'm just going to kind of scroll down through this pretty quickly. Of course, you all can access this anytime, but this is a fantastic resource we have for this program. So I really encourage, everyone to familiarize yourself with this. There's new information and updates being posted regularly, so this is just a great go-to. So we've got all of our eligible commodities listed here, which we've already gone through in the presentation. There are links here for the final rule, the notice of funding availability, and a cost benefit analysis. So all three of those you can click on for more information. For specific program details, so I pretty top level with these in the presentation, but if we want to find out more, this area of the web page is really helpful. So let's say we want to look at, let's just go livestock here. So we click on livestock, and this is actually going to give us another link to a web page specific to livestock. So we're going to click that. And then we're going to be redirected to the livestock program page, which has a lot more information. So it's going to give you all the eligible livestock. And then I mentioned the crosswalk in the livestock portion. This is where that lives. So we have all the common cattle names listed to the left here, and the different descriptions of what those common names, you know, the description related to those. And then on the far right, it's going to show you what category in CFAP that species will actually fall under. So I think this is super helpful. Again, I know we had a lot of questions in the beginning, and this is hopefully can make a little more sense of that piece. So, but all that information is listed here. And again, it's pretty comprehensive. And then we've got the payment rates, which again, we talked about in the presentation, but so all of that information is listed. Again, this is just the livestock page. There are pages for all the different categories of eligible commodities. So we do have a report linked here that will actually show you payments and applications that have been processed by state. So this will be posted every Monday. Then the portion about eligibility, and I'm going to pull up all the different forms here so we can just briefly look at those. But this gives, again, just a good overview of, you know, the eligibility part of this program. There's a portion that talks about payment limitation. So that's all really good information. And I mentioned the ineligible commodities and requests for additional covered commodities. So this portion of the web page gives a lot more information. And then we've also got the actual instructions of how comments can be submitted. So there's actually an online portal through the docket entry link, or information can be mailed to the address listed here. And again, comments can be submitted through June 22nd. We've got a little blurb on how to apply. This is where the National Call Center phone number is located. And then next is just, this is what I kind of want to walk through real quickly, is just some of the different forms and the actual payment calculator. So we're going to start with a quick tutorial on the actual payment calculator. And this is a good tool just to, you know, if you're not familiar with how that calculator works, this is a quick video that shows you how, and then it actually shows you how easy the application then generates from that calculator. So the calculator link is right here. It's the first bullet under the resources section. And then I'm just going to open the video and we'll watch that real quick here.
This video will show you just how easy it is to apply for USDA's new Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, or CFAP. Once sign-up begins May 26th, you can either download an Adobe PDF application or use our payment calculator to help you complete the application. Let's look at the payment calculator. Once you've downloaded the Excel workbook, the process is pretty simple. Just start filling in your information. Let's see. Jane Smith, 123 Main Street, Sears, Michigan, 12345. The first section is dairy production. Jane doesn't have dairy, but if she did, she would just include her production for January, February, and March of this year, 2020. Let's go to the non-specialty crop section. This is where the corn production is entered. On her 500 acres, Jane produced almost 100,000 bushels of corn in 2019. She had 40,000 bushels unsold as of January 15th. Next, her beef cattle. Jane sold 50 head of mature cattle between January and April and has 100 head on hand between April and May. So here's her estimated payment for beef cattle. And finally, apples. Jane sold 20,000 pounds of apples between January 15th and April 15th, and she shipped another 20,000 pounds that were not sold because of market disruptions. She also has no unsold and no unshipped inventory between January 15th and April 15th. In some cases where multiple people farm or ranch together, the payment limit may go up. And if that applies to your operation, here's where you add the additional people. Now, Jane can simply click on the Print the AD 3114 button to print the application, sign it, and send it over to the FSA County office. Please contact your local FSA office to discuss the best method to submit your signed application. Now, if you haven't worked with Farm Service Agency before, there may be some forms you need to fill out to get started. You can find these forms online at farmers.gov/CFAP. And don't worry if you need help, your friendly FSA representative is just a phone call away.
Okay, so that was just a quick overview of the payment calculator. Again, the actual document is linked from the webpage. It's this first bullet. Right now, I believe you do have to have Excel on your computer to actually get the workbook downloaded to where it'll have the drop downs and the autofill capability. So just a caveat on that. I do believe there are updates being made to it to where it will be able to be downloaded, through other means. But for right now, Excel is the best way to do that. So then real quick, I just wanted to look at some of the different forms that we talked about in the PowerPoint. So for eligibility, we're going to be looking at the AGI, which is this is the 941 form, and you're just certifying that you make less than or less than 900,000 or more than 900,000. And you're actually certifying this it's going to be tax years 16 through 18. So just a simple form. The county office address will go here at the top, which we can fill that out. But then name and address of the individual, the tax ID number, you're going to fill in 2020 here and for A, and then you're going to check A or B in section 5, and then sign and date here at the bottom. The next form, I mentioned this earlier, this is the highly erodible land and wetland certification. So most customers, if you've already done business with us, this should be on file and current, but we'll definitely check on this for you. But if you haven't done business with us and you're not basically producing an agricultural commodity, if you're not tilling the ground, if you're not participating in any other program that's subject to this compliance, which is basically federal crop insurance or any of our programs, and you've not converted a wetland, then this form is pretty easy. We need your name, last four of your tax ID, crop year, and then any other persons affiliated with your farm. And then you can check box A or B under section 5, whichever pertains, and then sign and date on the second page. So again, if you have questions about this, we can work through it with you. But that's the we call it HEL and wetland certification form. The next page, this is again for customers who have not done business with us. So if you're not in our system, then this is the way that we get you in our system. So just a basic information request form. And you'll just fill in the top part and then sign and date, and then the rest of it will take care of on our end. direct deposit form. This is just a simple form we use to get your bank account information so we can pay you. So this is an important one. And again, if you're already getting our payments, as long as nothing's changed, this should already be on file. If you're new to us, then just a simple form to give us your information, and then the bank account information where you want payments to go. The next form, this is just part of the farm operating plan. So this is a 901 form. This would accompany a 902 form. Again, if you're working with us already, we should have this. But if you've had any changes in your operation, we'll need to have this updated. And this 901 form is just specific to producers that are part of entities, and this gives us information about the different members. And then the last form, this is the actual application for CFAP. And as you saw from the payment calculator, this will generate automatically from the calculator if you do all of that through the Excel file. But we'll also take manuals. That's totally fine. We just need the state, the county, program year, application number. We can take care of that. And then your name, we'll need, just as the calculator walk through, your production listed. And this is fairly easy to follow. It says right on here, for dairy, January, February, March, you're going to fill out the form where where it does not say COC use only. You're going to look at those portions. And then if you have members part of your entity for increased payment limitation, you'll list those members in Part H and then sign and date. So I know I went through a lot of that pretty quick, threw a lot of information at you. I think we got through most of what I wanted to. We've got just a few minutes left, so I want to open it up for questions. But again, certainly the website is a great resource. And you can actually, there's a service center locator right here on the web page. So for Missouri, we can just click on the state, and then we can pick the county that we're located in. Let's just use Bates County, for example. We click go, and then it's going to give us contact information for the local FSA office. So the address, email address for the county director, and then the phone number. So, okay, with that, I think I'll open it up for questions.
We kind of lost your screen there toward the end, Jessica, for a minute.
Okay.
But I think everybody hopefully jotted down the website where they can go and download that. We can put the website in the chat box real quick as well. So, and then I had also put in the chat box our Agricultural Business and Policy MU Extension Facebook page. We also have some short videos and some information about the CFAP program. So if you're wanting some more information or wanting, we have some examples working through some different examples. We have a livestock example and a crop example. If you just kind of want to see what it looks like, check those out.
I mentioned it earlier, but feel free to give me a call or send me an email. I've got my information up here now, and be happy to work with you that way too. So
any questions? Thank you so much, Jessica, for spending your time with us today and sharing this. It's really valuable info, and I've got on and played around with the calculator, and it really is easy to use once you get in there. So I encourage everybody to go and to check it out. And thanks to all of you for joining us, and we hope that you got something out of today's Lunch and Learn. Hope you join us again. And in the meantime, if you have any other questions, please see the resources. So glad to help you in any way we can. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.